Welcome, and this is The Alchemist, Vitriol. The fastidious room fell silent, as if to mirror both Shayna and my emotions. What do you mean, Shayna? What do you mean we have a plague? I urgently inquired. Shayna, her petite figure somehow even frailer now, continued. At first, I thought nothing of it. We had a few outbreaks over the last few years, but each ended up not being worth the paper on which they were printed. I recoiled in fear and confusion. Plagues were something we used to fear. They were the wrath of the gods, could annihilate entire countries, yet the humans of today had endured many of them? I'm afraid I don't understand, Shayna. You've had more than one plague. Why isn't the whole world quivering? Why aren't most praying in the streets for the gods' mercy? I stopped myself short. These people weren't the same as us. They knew much more, and had control not seen during my prime. No, that's not important. Why isn't anyone working on a cure? The soft, crimson pillows of the couch screeched as Shayna peered out the opposite window. It took her a while before she answered. We have had many plagues. We are a growing world. Our populations increase without bounds due to our technology. Not everyone can share its benefits. I waited patiently for her to continue. She had much to say. She turned a tired, worried gaze towards me and continued. Technology is a double-edged sword. In your eyes, it has made us gods. But gods also have problems. There are god killers out there, and we make them with our own hands. I sat down next to her and felt my body sucked into the crimson softness that is the couch. The world felt much larger than the day before. I turned my head to look at her, trying to hide my worry. She didn't need to worry about me as well. What do you mean, god killers? She rested her head on her hands, and her fiery locks seemed to shield her from the worries of the world as they fell in front of her face. You should know about natural selection. You should know that nature would creatively exterminate the quote unfit, end quote. Only those who can adapt may live in her world. I placed my hand on her back, gently comforting her as I interjected. I know, yes. Natural selection, originally found by Charles Darwin when he investigated finches on the Galapagos Islands. He stated that organisms adapt to the environment over a long period of time to become more, quote, successful, end quote. Her voice seemed to drift slightly, but she sounded more at ease. She still selects. Our plagues are lessons in fitness. However, the world is much more open now than it was years ago. Plagues don't only affect the population they start in, they punish the rest of the world as well. I didn't say anything in response. Shayna didn't need words. I merely brought her in for a warm embrace, to which she didn't object. It seemed like she needed it. It was midnight before Shayna left the room. We spent our time comforting each other in various ways. We didn't eat, but neither of us had an appetite. The moon gleamed through the window onto the desk and gave only enough lighting to make the couch seem like a puddle of dried blood. I let both envelop me to ease my mind. The moonlight glistened onto the equipment I received from Shayna. as well as with documents which contained my research. I knew why I was different. I didn't know how to pass it on in its entirety. It was an hour or two after midnight, but the usual hustle-bustle of a city ordinarily persisted throughout the day. Some strangers were still out and about, but they were covered, masked, and briskly walked to their destinations. My destination was one full of the husks of the forgotten. They were the first exposed, but not fortunate enough to receive the treatment they required. There wasn't enough space in the graveyards either, so they were piled up outside the morgues for cremation. The heaps of husks reached the stars, the smell to match. No one wished to live in the area, and few ventured close. They dwarfed the surrounding buildings with their sheer magnitude. It's a tragedy. These people were gods, capable of starting their venture out to the stars. Yet Gaia was still as ruthless as ever. I collected the samples I lacked from the departed and returned. On returning from my short excursion, I burnt my clothes and slathered myself in soap for a good half hour. Shayna gave me enough books to know what I could and should do when obtaining samples, but given the severity of the situation, I found it best to follow some archaic practices. I knew I needed to do something. I was a doctor. I helped people. Leaving them to their death would haunt me for centuries to come. It would be rather lonely as well. Shayna was still asleep when I entered her room. It was plain, minimalistic, but still beautiful and luxurious. She chose black, white, and crimson as her colors of choice, which gave the room an additional hollowness. Her head blended in with the pillows, her body covered by a pitch-black duvet. The small mountains she formed under it indicated she was sleeping in the fetal position. The windows were closed, but she didn't undo the drapes. The overcast skies lit the room in its natural dim light. It will rain soon. I sat down next to her and heard her stir and moan as she awoke. I caressed her hair lightly and whispered, "Good morning. It's time to wake up. I made you some breakfast." It took some time before her eyes opened, but she smiled and sat upright. She started filling herself up with the eggs and next moved on to the bread. She took some gulps here and there of a beverage I prepared as she ate. Neither of us spoke a word. We only took comfort in each other's presence. She was alone, and so was I. I lost my family centuries ago, and she lost hers a decade ago. We weren't family. The blood which related us was nothing but a mere percent, if at all that much. She finished her meal in silence. I took the tray in silence. Everything we did was in silence. I rested on her bed, next to her, while she scurried deeper under the duvet. I called out to her and heard a mere grunt in response, anticipating the coming drizzle. "Shayna, I know what I can do to help, but it's a difficult choice to make." She didn't reply, but huddled up next to me. "I have a cure, but I was lucky. You're lucky, but so many thousands, millions, aren't. But the severity of the situation demands my action." I turned to face her. She did the same, but still held her peace. Her crimson hair was messy, her face unpolished. I gingerly touched my beard and thought over my future actions. I was afraid. The answers I obtained looking at the samples and my lifeblood horrified me. I can help them, but things will be different. They won't be as clear-cut as now. The implications are far-reaching and horrendous. My hands will be covered in the blood of thousands should I proceed. I can do it alone, but I don't want to. I gazed sincerely into her hazel eyes. Will you help me? The sudden drizzle muffled her answer, but I smiled in return. They called me out on a whim, but given this damned quarantine, it was as good an excuse as any to leave the country. The flight to Greece was tedious and long-spun, but I had grown accustomed to the long flights as the director of the United Kingdom's National Health Insurance. Upon arrival in the country's airspace, I saw that Greece, similar to the United Kingdom, suffered heavily at the hands of the plague. They too had hills of corpses tying up the morgues, with nary a car in sight. They ushered me into the required protective equipment and followed suit. I wasn't the only one to attend this meeting. Social media helped spread the rumors of a secretive cure which the Greek government held. The rumors were unsubstantiated at best, but the Greek invitation seemed to prove otherwise. I figured it best to see the tests they were conducting, rather than spend my time at home, waiting for the plague to exterminate most of the population, and then disappear. The brief trip through the deserted airport led to a black limousine, which, in turn, took me to one of the largest hospitals in Greece, under guarded lockdown. I was among 20, ushered into the observation room of the operation room. The administrator on hand explained the situation to each country's interpreter. We were a ragtag coalition of many different countries, and likely wouldn't be the last, which does explain the disorderly process. What they said was simple: wait for the specialist and their test subjects to arrive. Through the provided window, we were able to see all types of medical equipment. In the center of the room, they prepared a metallic bed, often seen in movies. We collectively gasped when they brought out the late-stage patient. It was something we saw all too often, but was capable of upsetting even the most veteran of surgeons. This plague was special. It ate you from the inside out. Those who were unlucky lost their limbs first, which was the case with this patient. He lost his left arm to the necrosis, and his left leg was quickly following suit. We turned our heads to look at the person entering the room without a hazmat suit, a stark contrast to the medical personnel on hand. Those of us who saw him first erupted with a collective roar. He merely smiled in return, walking haughtily to the patient on the bed. He was of average height and features, but he seemed entirely foreign. He picked up a small syringe and plunged it into the man's necrotic leg and turned to face us. His lips slowly bloomed into a smile. He didn't bare his teeth, but instead caressed his beard in thought as more roars erupted in the small observation room. The necrotic leg was slowly, at a snail's pace, recovering. The man opened his arms wide, almost as if in welcoming an embrace, and spoke with a strange accent of English. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a cure." The interpreters scurried to their respective leads and translated. Moments after, they asked their first question. The gaunt lady of Middle Eastern descent walked up to the speaker. "Is this real? We didn't just bear witness to some sophisticated computer graphics." The man belatedly revealed his teeth in a hearty grin and asserted, "This is reality. That is exactly why we gave you a window to peer through." More interpreters stepped up and questioned the unknown man. He answered with a practiced grin. I stepped up to the speaker. "What are the side effects?" His smirk turned somewhat sour at the question. Unforeseen side effects? He caressed his beard in practiced thought and responded with heavy words. "It only works on a quarter of the test subjects." I spoke into the speaker again. "And why should we trust this cure of yours if it only works on 1 in 4 people?" He smirked. "It's been 2 years since the original outbreak of a plague. There is no other cure." The observation room didn't object. Too many had died already, and there was no cure in sight. He continued, with apparent smug. "Most countries have lost half of their populations, and projections are that this plague will be the end of the species Homo sapiens. Do you want a guaranteed fourth of a population, or none at all?" I was silent for a mere moment, eyeing the foreigner, looking up at us from the medical room. A difficult choice indeed. "Exactly," he returned. "What other side effects are there?" "You're too quiet for there to be only one side effect." He smiled gleefully. He expected the question. "You should already know that the plague mutates far too much. That's why it's difficult to cure. My cure only helps undo the damage the plague does." "You mean we'll require long-term exposure to the drug to ensure our survival?" The man nodded in affirmation. "The plague is relentless. Only with constant injections will the plague end. However, this is merely a stopgap solution until either we adapt or the plague becomes a non-issue." He looked at each of us in turn and with a foreign expression concluded the conversation. "Luckily, this means there's profit for those who wish to take advantage of the situation." He left as haughtily as he entered the room.